Hi, everyone. I'm Don Rooney.
And I'm John Timpane.
Welcome to the musical Innertube, the podcast born out of a mistake.
We once meant to introduce a soothing musical interlude, but we said soothing musical Innertube, and the name stuck.
On this podcast, we talk to interesting people about their interesting lives, jobs, hobbies, and passions.
Difference makers who really make a difference.
Dr. Asa Stahl is an astrophysicist, award-winning children's book author, and science communicator. And during his PhD at Rice University, Asa published 2 top astronomy children's books. The first book is called The Big Bang Book, and his second book, Picnic Planet, a lunchtime guide to your galaxy's exoplanets. It goes without saying that a writer of children's books about space is the perfect guy to talk to John and me about space. As the Planetary Society's science editor, Asa writes and produces accessible content that helps everybody engage with astronomy and space exploration. And today he's here to talk with us about things that you can find in the sky in 2025. Hi, Asa. Welcome to the Innertube.
Thanks for having me.
One of the things that's already taken place in January was the alignment of the planets. And I did get a chance to see, I don't have a telescope, so I couldn't see Uranus and Neptune, but I did see what looked like it was Saturn, Venus, Jupiter, and Mars that all seemed to go in an arc across the sky. That is not a very common occurrence. Am I right about that?
So it's more common probably than the news would lead you to believe, but it is still definitely uncommon and a treat. It happens definitely not every year, but it's not like a once in a century thing. Once every several years, maybe is more like it. At a glance perspective, incredible to see Venus, Jupiter, Mars, and Saturn all in a row. And as it's stretched over the sky, kind of forces you into this perspective where you kind of see how the solar system is laid out, and forces you to sort of place yourself on that larger stage. So I was pointing out to my friends all month long.
For it to happen like this, that we from our viewpoint can see this arc, is something that you would have to be a fiendishly talented mathematician even to know that could happen. I mean, we are intersecting all of these different arcs, all of these different angles, and we're at the right place at the right time. That in itself, to me, is an astonishing thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about it, the planets are going to spend about half their time on one side of the sun, half time on the other part of the solar system from the sun. And it's just a question of where they are relative to Earth. Now, because the outer planets' orbits take so long by comparison to Earth's, when those don't line up, like when Jupiter and Saturn would say be on opposite sides of the sun, then you're not going to see them next to each other in the sky for a longer period, which is why when these things do happen, they tend to happen in more close succession. So I believe the last time that this happened was just a few years ago. I think around 2019 or 2020. It's the kind of thing that is dazzling and as a huge treat for stargazers because I mean, like I went and took out a bunch of people stargazing who had never looked through a telescope. And typically, you go out with a telescope, maybe you can see one planet, maybe 2. And I went and showed them 4 planets in a row, and they had no idea that this was the sort of rare thing that you would never get. And it's like, yes, you should be like, where's the applause? This is incredible. But I mean, it also, of all the events to happen within the past year or so, I think that if we're going to talk about rare cosmic coincidences, then it's got to be the total solar eclipse.
Now, are we due for another total solar eclipse this year, somewhere in the world?
No, not this year. There will be a few partial solar eclipses, none of which I think go through America. The next total solar eclipse, there's going to be a couple toward the end of the decade. And the one that will be really good is going to happen in, I believe it's 2027. And it's going to go through the tip of like the Strait of Gibraltar and across North Africa. And it's going to be even better than the solar eclipse that happened this past year across America, because that one peaked at about maybe 4 minutes long. This one's going to be about 7 minutes long of totality, which is quite rare. It's about as long as they get, almost boringly long. Like you'll get sick of looking at it. That's how long it's going to be. And it's going to be longest around when it's over Egypt. So you could imagine like being at the tombs of Luxor and seeing a total solar eclipse over it, I can only imagine the level of tourism.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And as a science fiction fan and a guy who read comic books when I was young, something's going to happen.
Definitely.
Some beast is going to come out and threaten the earth. And thank God we've got superheroes to take care of it.
I hate it when that happens. It's so scary. You
I
know,
know.
when the last solar eclipse came across the United States, where I live was very definitely on the outskirts of that. But the sky still went down enough points of brightness that all the birds in the area started to roost. And you could definitely tell it was en masse. They all reacted to it. They all started acting as though it was dusk. And it was such a beautiful and uncanny experience. I know you know better than I do. That nature reacts to these things, and all of the critters in our area just said, "Oops, must be 5:30, time to turn in." And so even though by far it was not total, and yet even just a little bit of an eclipse makes that much of a difference. It was totally uncanny. Totally uncanny.
Yeah. Did you feel any wind picking up or anything like that?
Absolutely, because the degree to which the sun is warming everything changes, and
Right.
a little change is a big change. And yes, you could feel a little breeze there. Absolutely. And we're sitting with our next door neighbor, an elderly lady who's just wonderful, Marge, and we're explaining all this to her, and she going, "I'll be gosh darn, no one ever explained this to me before." So I had some of the pleasure you probably have, Asa, in being able to sit with somebody as they first learn about all this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's, definitely part of why I do what I do. It's fun to share.
USA Today and other publications just leap all over these astronomical phenomena. I know that they were just fixated this year on the different full moons. There was the wolf moon and the swan moon and a bunch of other moons. And every time a full moon would come up, they would tell you what moon it was, and they would publish pictures of it coming over cities at massive sizes and all that sort of thing. So do you find it easier now to convey the proper shock and awe, I guess, to the general public because you have a lot of media behind you?
I would
Or do
say
you have to run around and correct
I would
things?
I would say no. Yeah. I think if
Yeah.
there's one thing that gets people consistently interested, it's probably big events in space exploration, like the launching of James Webb Space Telescope or something like that. That tends to hook people more. Whereas stuff like the night sky things, I mean, meteor showers, actually. Meteor showers are great, though they don't really, they're not really visible from cities. So they don't help out if you're in an urban area much in terms of getting people engaged with astronomy. The full moons or the super moons or whatever, I'm sad to say, are mostly clickbait. The difference in size between a full supermoon and the opposite, so the reason we have supermoons, right, is that the moon's distance from the Earth varies slightly in its orbit. So sometimes when the moon is full, it happens to be a little bit farther away than other full moons. Sometimes it's a little bit closer. And when that's closest, it'll look biggest. And that variation is small enough, a little bit less than 10% between the sort of median size of the moon and the biggest or smallest it will get. It's basically indistinguishable to your untrained eye. If you're a stargazer looking up at the moon all the time, and maybe you are because you love the moon, then you'll notice it just barely. But otherwise, it's hard to pick them out of a lineup. If I held up a bunch of different moons at the distance that it is in the sky, it would be difficult to see. And it turns out the number one thing that changes your perception of how big the moon is, more than how actually far away it is from Earth and its orbit, is how close it is to the horizon, how low it is on the sky. This is an optical illusion. And that's why all those photos that you see in those articles of the moon looking so honking big, it tends to be right above the horizon, right? There's just something about when the moon is that low and that you can put it sort of near other objects on the ground in your mind's eye. It makes it look gigantic.
Most of those pictures I did notice were of the moon rising. it does look bigger when it's rising, and I assume that was because it was closer to the horizon. Um, meteor showers, yeah, we're always told about meteor showers. There are two reasons that I never see a meteor shower. Number one, I'm in a suburban area, and it's not real dark. And number two, they always come at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I'm not up at 2 a.m. to see them, but are they better to see closer to dawn because the sun lights up more of the falling meteors?
They are better to see closer to dawn in the second half of the night, but it's a relatively slight effect compared to just there being a meteor shower or not in the first place. So I encourage you, next time there's a meteor shower, you can go out. If the sun sets at like 5 p.m. or whatever, you can go out at 6 p.m. and see it just fine. The much more important thing would be, is the moon up or not? If there's a big bright moon and it's 3 a.m., it's not going to really matter that you stayed up that late. But if there's no moon and it's 8 p.m. and it's dark, you'll see some great meteors.
So it all depends on the moon washing out the light of the meteors. Well, what are some of the things that you're looking forward to in 2025? Some of the things that you want to take people out to see?
Oh, that's a great question. Unfortunately, a lot of the really cool things, the things that immediately come to my mind are things that aren't even stargazing events, but like spaceplane events, like the launch of more Starship or New Glenn, Blue Origin and SpaceX rockets that would, break amazing new technological ground. And I'll just watch those live streams like a nerd from the comfort of my home. Or lunar landings. There's going to be a bunch of new robotic lunar landings this coming year that, unfortunately you can't really see from your backyard.
And maybe some of them will land not upside down.
Yes, that would be lovely.
Yeah.
Maybe sideways.
Yes.
I understand one of them is going to have a dustbuster on it or some
that's
different,
exactly right.
Interesting kind of vacuum.
A lunar Roomba.
You heard right. I've been calling it a lunar dustbuster. Though it technically, it doesn't suck. It blows, just so you know. But it effectively sucks.
Okay.
So this is actually technology the Planetary Society had a hand in. It's called PlanetVac. And the idea is that collecting samples from the surfaces of other worlds is potentially very scientifically powerful. That there's stuff you can do if you bring it into the spacecraft, and then ideally even have that get launched back to Earth somehow from the spacecraft. There's a lot of science you can do that's more than just if you are studying it where it's laying on the ground. But if you do that, then typically that means you have like some fancy, complex robotic arm, which can have a lot of different points of failure and be kind of restricted in how it is put on the spacecraft, what it does. It draws more power, a bunch of different stuff. It's more of a headache. So this technology is to instead have, it's just a little tube that sticks out of the bottom of the spacecraft, have like an extra lander leg, and hovers right near the surface. And it just jets out a burst of gas that then swirls up a bunch of the material of moon dust or whatever, Mars soil, up into the tube, and then it catches it and collects it. And so there's a mission that is currently on its way to land on the moon, hopefully March 2nd, which has this aboard and will be it's not going to do any scientific measurements, but it's going to be a technology demonstration to show that this works. And then if it does work, you can use it as a cheap, efficient way to collect samples from other worlds. And it's slated to go on another mission where it will do science to one of the moons of Mars, which has never been landed on.
Wow.
So, and
that reminds me, isn't there an effort to return some samples of Martian dirt? I don't even know if they really have dirt, but yes, some samples of Mars, let's put it that way, back to Earth. And what stage is that at?
They do. It does have dirt. Super dirty over there. So it needs a dust busting. Now, this is a part of a huge overarching effort that NASA and the European Space Agency has been conducting for years now. That there's this rover over on Mars right now called Perseverance, which has been collecting these samples in little tubes that look like kind of like test tubes and leaving them behind and collecting them within the rover as it goes along for years now. And it's found amazing things that scientists really want to get their hands on to study back on Earth with the like bigger, better machines we have here. And so there's been this plan for years now that spacecraft would go down to Mars and collect these samples and then launch something back to Earth that would then deliver these samples back here. But it's been beset by a variety of like planning issues. It's gone over budget in the idea of how it should be pursued going forward. It's changed from administration to administration. And especially right now, going into this new administration, its future is definitely in question, or how fast it will happen. And there's concerns from, there have been concerns from the White House before and probably are now that China would do it first, bring back samples first because they have their own Mars sample collection mission going on. So we don't really know right now exactly what's going to happen with that and when it's going to happen. There's the tentative date is that it'll happen in like the mid 2030s that we'll bring these samples back, but it's been pushed before already. So who knows?
Yeah. And speaking of that, we hear all the time about the International Space Station. Obviously, there are two people that have been stranded up there for a while that are supposed to come back. What is it, next month in March, I guess, or somewhere in there?
Yes, February.
February
25th
is the scheduled time right now. I mean, it's been pushed back before. So,
yeah. But there are other space stations from other countries orbiting the Earth right now. Is that right?
Yeah, China has its space station Tiangong. I hope I didn't butcher that too bad. Which it's a 3-module space station, and the ISS is much bigger by comparison. The ISS is like the size of a football field with solar panels. It's gigantic. But the ISS is going to last forever. Not something to look forward to, and not something that's going to happen in 2025. But at some point in the next decade, it's probably going to come down, be intentionally crashed into the Earth, into the middle of the Pacific Ocean, because it's just reaching the end of its lifetime. The stuff on it isn't built to last forever. And so we're not going to have like a NASA space station like that. We'll just have private space stations and this Chinese space station. It'll be a very different future in low Earth orbit.
Wow.
We'll return to our podcast in just a minute, but first, the soothing musical interlude.
Dr. Asa Stahl is an astrophysicist, award-winning children's book author, and science communicator. During his PhD at Rice University, Asa worked to discover newborn planets around other stars.
Asa began writing about space to share his curiosity. He's published 2 pop astronomy children's books. His first children's book, The Big Bang Book, is a Sakura Medal finalist, an ILA nonfiction honor book, and an Ezra Jack Keats Award nominee. His second book, Picnic Planet, A Lunchtime Guide to Your Galaxy's Exoplanets, came out in 2023.
As the Planetary Society's science editor, Asa writes and produces accessible content that helps others engage with astronomy, space exploration, and all the ways the Planetary Society contributes to both. You can find out more about Asa on his website, Asa Stahl, that's ASASTAHL.com.
And now, we return you to the musical Innertube, already in progress.
There's a point at which Saturn is going to look like a regular planet, as I understand it.
I was gonna say that.
Take it away then.
When you ask about things to look for in the coming year, I was gonna say something that you can't look for, and so you should look for it before it goes away. Starting in about March, Saturn will be at the right angle compared to Earth. That its rings will be edge on.
Oh,
and so they're so thin that they effectively disappear from typical telescope's view from Earth. So everyone I'm showing Saturn in a telescope now, I'm saying you're not going to get that for most of this year, and so you're lucky you're getting it now. So from March to November, the Saturn will just it'll look like a boring, I mean, not boring, but a way less cool.
It'll not have the rings, the distinct rings. Although we've seen that other planets have rings as well. JWST telescope have seen rings around like Uranus and Neptune and some of the farther out planets that we never saw before, even with telescopes.
So there's rings around a lot of the planets in the solar system, and they're just kind of really hard to see at visible wavelengths, the wavelengths of light that we see out with our naked eye. And then what JWST has given us these beautiful images in the infrared of Uranus and Neptune shining super bright with these rings. And it's a little bit crazy to even imagine that there are rings that we can't see that are there. But I mean, yeah, that's it. That's part of the magnificence of this incredible tool.
So, Don, I think you should go into your Betelgeuse rant.
All right.
Is there a pre-made rant?
Well, it's not a pre-made rant, but it's something I've been wondering about.
Me too. Yeah.
Okay. My granddaughter is very much into theater, and she went a couple of years ago to see the play Betelgeuse on Broadway. And then she came back, and of course, right after she came back from that, the sequel movie was released, Betelgeuse. So she went to the theater to see that. So she's been up to her neck in Betelgeuse stuff over the last 8-9 months or whatever. And when we were out one night, I pointed out the actual star Betelgeuse, which is not pronounced Betelgeuse. Am I correct on that? How is it officially pronounced?
How fancy you are. I know plenty of astronomers who just say Betelgeuse because they don't want to sound kind of like snobs. But you can be like Betelgeuse or something. I've heard a few different ways depending on how well you know your German.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll just stick with Betelgeuse then. So I pointed that out to her, and I did notice that it does kind of shine slightly red. So I went back and I looked it up online, and it did say it was a red giant. And then I found a follow-up article that said that this red giant is fluctuating in its brightness and might actually go nova. So is that true? And if so, how would that look from Earth?
So I have a Betelgeuse rant. If you go.
All right. I've done mine. Now you do yours.
I'm so impressed if people have Betelgeuse anything. This is great.
Yeah, Tim Burton didn't direct my Betelgeuse rant, though, so it's not as good as the movie. But
oh, okay. All right.
So yeah, Betelgeuse is a red supergiant, which means that it's it's a massive star. It's much, much bigger than the sun, both in mass and in size. It's about 700 times wider than the sun. So, like, if you plot Betelgeuse where the sun is in the solar system, it would engulf Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, take up all that space. It's huge.
Wow, that's crazy.
And it's super young because really, really big stars, really massive stars, evolve very fast. They burn through their fuel really fast. And eventually, they can no longer sustain their own the thermonuclear reactions, the fusion in their cores that pushes away the gravity that would otherwise lead them to completely collapse, and then they can go supernova. Now, this will happen with Betelgeuse at some point. It will go supernova, but exactly when is sort of up for debate, but probably not for about 100,000 years at least. Now, we can't say that with certainty because it turns out that we actually don't know exactly how massive Betelgeuse is or how fast it spins or exactly how old it is. Like, basically all of the definite things that you'd want us to be able to say about it. Because these are hard things to measure for many stars, but especially stars like Betelgeuse, which is it's like roiling. Its surface is doing all this crazy stuff. It's like flinging out plasma into space, and then that's caused interesting things. Like, I don't know if perhaps the article you were looking at was talking about a few years ago, and only stopped just recently, Betelgeuse got dimmer all of a sudden, and it was really
Yeah, I think that's what the article said. Yeah.
so. And what people are wondering is this because it's about to go supernova? Like something is changing in it because it finally ran out of the helium that it's burning in its core, and now it's starting to fuse these heavier elements, which means it's on a runaway train towards supernova, right? It turns out that's probably not what caused the dimming. It just ejected this huge blast of plasma into space, and that plasma cooled down and started blocking some of the light, and so made it look dimmer from Earth.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, it will go supernova eventually, and when it does, it'll be the closest supernova by far to have ever been observed from Earth, at least in recorded history, and it'll be potentially as bright as the full moon. And it'll last for months. That explosion or that light,
Unbelievable.
it would be
Wow.
amazing. It would be beautiful, and it would pose no harm to us. So, kind of a freebie.
Oh,
So I don't expect you to have this on your on the tip of your tongue, Asa, but how distant in terms of light years is Betelgeuse?
So it's another thing we don't exactly know, but about 500 light years.
About 500 light years. So, I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility that all this may have already happened. It just hasn't gotten here yet.
Yes, and so I know this is one of the things that people love to think about whenever they go stargazing is, oh, well, maybe the light from all the stars we're looking at is coming from things that have already gone. And for the most part, that's actually not true. Most stars that we can see with our naked eye are close enough and stable enough that we don't think they're going to die within the amount of time that the light would take to travel to us. But Betelgeuse is the one really big exception. If there's any star that if you're looking at its light and that light might be coming from a dead star, it's Betelgeuse.
I'm glad I asked that question. I had, and this is making me unintentionally look very smart, but no,
there you go.
I'm just that I'm just that dullard who, I mean, I have a telescope, and actually one of the questions I'd love to get into with you is suppose somebody wanted to get started really stargazing, what would they need? What kind of equipment? And you might have some ideas about this. So maybe we could do that in a second. But really, I go out there and, I do very basic things. Like I try to find Andromeda,
Really?
It's really cool. And you can find it if you've got a telescope, and it looks like a little tiny smudge in the sky if you have like the eyes of Ted Williams, which could see anything, and you can see it in the sky. And I know people who claim they can see it all the time, but with a telescope, you can see it. So it's so I know it's basic, but it is a thrill, it just is a thrill. So, I keep wondering about that. I look around and go, oh, how many of these stars are still here? I mean, I know the planets are still here. That's, I know they're still around. And it's such a big, so let me ask that question. I mean, if I wanted to get started as a stargazer, what are some things you think I should really have? I mean, just off the top of your head, what things would you just,
I mean, a lot of it depends where you live and how dark it is, and how much effort you're willing to put in and invest. But I mean, the bare minimum is a chair, a comfortable chair, a warm jacket, a thermos. Beyond that, you really, you don't need any equipment necessarily. It depends on what you're looking for, right? I mean, there's a lot you can do with your naked eyes if you live in a dark enough place, or even without. If you're trying to get started a bit beyond that, people sleep on binoculars. Binoculars are a great way to dip your toe into stargazing without sort of diving into a whole telescope, especially because telescopes can be kind of intimidating. There's like a lot of science involved with like, how do I even use this? Or like, how does it work? What kind do I buy? Pretty complicated, unfortunately. And binoculars are a nice way that you're not going to be able to like see like beautiful views of like, you're not going to be able to see like the Great Red Spot on Jupiter. They're not going to magnify things to that extent or collect enough light. But they'll give you good views of the moon. And if you're in a dark enough place, you'll be able to see things like star clusters or the blur of Andromeda. But if you live in a city and you still want to be able to see stuff and you're willing to spend on a telescope, which by the way, you can get a telescope that is good enough to see planets in a city for like $150. It's not that bad. It's like, do you want 6 telescopes or a smartphone?
That's a choice.
And then you can look at the planets. Yeah, I don't know. This is how I measure everything. Whenever I go to like a restaurant, I'm like, I could get this burrito, or I could get a 20th of the telescope.
A man with his priorities straight. There you go.
Yeah, absolutely. But so you know what to do with them, Asa. That gives you an advantage. I mean, you get a telescope, and now you have to acquire some skills, don't you? About how to point, how to look through one.
Yeah.
You know,
What I'd recommend is start easy. Let's not be overly ambitious, because there's a certain amount of activation energy with like getting out there and standing outside at night, and committing yourself to like this new hobby in a way. So just starting easy with planets and stuff like Andromeda is a great way to start. And also, that like even the simplest sight you can find the telescope is still like knocks your socks off that it's there, that it's really up there, that you can see it directly in the same universe as you. It's happening. It's and it's almost like this weird, fragile Christmas ornament hanging in the sky.
It's so beautiful how you put that. And, I should do a service for my listeners in saying that Andromeda is the galaxy most like us and closest to us, and you actually can see it. It is just barely visible in a night sky that has no light interference, and it will show up on a decent telescope. And I have had the pleasure of actually seeing it hanging like that beautiful Christmas ornament in the sky. And I guess in about 250 million years, it'll be passing by or passing through. Who knows exactly what's going to happen? We probably won't be around for that. Dawn might be. I mean, but
Probably
the
not.
rest of,
Probably not. I'm only going to have my head frozen for 250 years, so I may not be around for that. I'm not sure.
Why? What happens after 250 years?
Well, after that, I think it's the warranty's up. Everything goes out the window.
his subscription to Netflix lapses forever.
But it'll have increased in price by about 5 times. Hey, speaking of galaxies, there was another article I read, Asa, about another a galaxy that I don't want to say we just discovered it, but it popped up in the news again last year, and it was like I'm trying to remember how it was described, but it was described as a line of jewels or something like that, and it was apparently a galaxy that was much like ours when the Milky Way was forming.
I think the word you're looking
where
for.
I'm going with this?
The word you're looking for is firefly sparkle.
Yeah, firefly sparkle. That's right.
Yeah,
which sounded like somebody's niece came up with. The
Yes.
name.
Yeah. It sounds like a pony.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
was just going to say, it sounds like a unicorn name. It's amazing.
Well, it kind of is a unicorn.
But what is that exactly?
So, this is a galaxy that is only about 600 million years old, which sounds pretty old, to a person. But compared to the universe, which is about 13.8 billion years old, the observable universe, and the Milky Way is about that old itself. Our galaxy is over a dozen billion years old. This galaxy is just a baby, super newborn. And what's amazing about it, besides that, in general, we've been able to see with the James Webb Space Telescope, discover for the first time lots of bright, big galaxies that were younger than any other galaxies we'd discovered yet. So galaxies that are only 250 million years or so after the Big Bang. We hadn't seen anything that early in the universe yet in terms of galaxies. And this one is super cool. Just also, if you look up an image of it, if you just Google Firefly Sparkle Galaxy, it looks like this beautiful string of beads. And you might think like, well, that's not how galaxies look. Galaxies look like, kind of like flying saucer shapes or spirals or maybe like blobs, but not like strings of beads, right? That's strange. And it's because that's not actually how this galaxy looks, or not how it is, it's how it looks. The light from this galaxy is being bent on its way toward us by really massive galaxies between us and it. And so it gets stretched into this weird arc. But each of those beads are clusters with clumps within the galaxy where stars are forming. And so they're just kind of like this massive spawning ground that are making lights like red and blue light. And so it ends up looking like these strings of beads. But if you sort of undo the bending of the light, then really the galaxy kind of looks like a teardrop full of sparkles.
Wow. Which actually sounds even more like a 16-year-old or 6-year-old named it a teardrop full of sparkles. But that's kind of cool. Now, that's something that only an advanced telescope can see, though, right? That's not something that we could pick up.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You would need a few $1 billion probably for your telescope budget.
Yeah. Which, John may have that, but I ran clean out.
Yeah, just let me look in this pocket.
Yeah. I've
know.
been buying too many burritos recently, so I don't have the telescope.
I have to go in and cash in a few of my old smartphones and see if I can get a telescope. Thanks, Asa, for taking us through this and helping us figure out what's going on this year. So I guess the next big thing we should look for is that dustbuster landing on the moon. That's the next thing that you're looking forward to?
I would say in terms of sure thing events, yes. But there is one other wild card I want to bring up. Though Betelgeuse probably won't go supernova anytime soon, there is a star system that could go nova.
Okay.
And so supernova is different than nova. Supernova is when the star completely collapses and then essentially dies and throws off this giant explosion. Novas are much less bright, but still quite bright. And there's this star system called T Corona Borealis, which you can look up, that is really two stars orbiting one another. And material from one of the stars is constantly falling onto the other. And eventually, periodically, enough material sort of builds up on this other star that it burns through it all at once in this massive conflagration. And that's a nova, and it'll essentially look like a new star in the sky, which is why it's called nova, like new in Latin. So if you just look it up later, or if you look at it later, once it happens, it'll just look like, oh, that's a star. The magic is knowing that there was not a star there before that you could see with your naked eye. That it looked like it was just born. That just happened, and that only happens from this system about once every 80 years. And the last time it happened was in the 40s. And so scientists have been watching it and saying like, "Ooh, it's going to happen," and we're actually overdue at this point. They thought it was going to happen by like last fall. So any minute now, this thing's going to happen, and we're going to get a cool sight in the night sky that anyone will be able to see with the naked eye.
Wow.
I guess what we need to do is figure out what part of the sky it is, look at it now and see nothing, and then look at it after the nova happens and see something. What part of the sky are we talking about?
It's in the constellation Corona Borealis, which is kind of near where the Big Dipper's handle points.
Okay.
Yeah, I know it's a little bit counterintuitive, maybe anticlimactic for my advice to all the stargazers out there to go look at nothing.
Well, but that's cool. If you look at nothing, and then suddenly in another few months or whatever, there's something, that's kind of cool.
I mean, at the advanced state of our surveillance of the sky, we might have real time coming into being sequences, right? We might, I don't know if we're going to have a movie or a video. Well, actually, we might. I mean, right? We might have the moment where we suddenly can see it. And maybe that would be so dramatic. I mean, that would blow the top of my head off.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's why a lot of scientists are excited about this. Like, this isn't just going to be a cool sight for everyone to, be agog at, but also this is going to be a nova that, because we're seeing it coming with all of this, like, we have all this technology now, all these telescopes that we didn't have before that have been watching this thing and waiting. At the earliest sign that it's going nova, there's going to be telescopes all around the world watching it to see exactly how it goes down. And yeah, I bet that we'll get some footage from somewhere on Earth of some amateur astronomer who happened to be looking up at that part of the sky, or who was actually recording it, to measure its brightness, because hundreds of people are doing that waiting to see when it goes nova, and they catch the exact moment. That would be incredible.
Unbelievable.
That would be so
Wow.
cool. So cool.
Real-time stuff out there. I mean, at such a distance. I mean, it is more than spooky. It's incredible.
Well, that describes John, too. More than spooky, he's incredible.
Wow, that's weirdly sweet.
And just weird, too.
Yeah, I'll settle for weird. I always have.
Me too.
Asa, thank you so much for being on the show, and maybe we'll tap you later on in the year and see if there's anything else that's popped up that we need to look at or something that we need to anticipate as we go into the last half of 25 or into 26. And where's the place you work that people can keep track of all this stuff? Give it a plug.
The Planetary Society, a space nonprofit, CEO Bill Nye, doing very cool stuff and trying to advance space science and exploration, get NASA missions off the ground, stuff like that, reach out to the public about astronomy, do things like this, and also put dustbusters on the moon.
Which is something, that's a mission that I wouldn't have thought about, but now that you talk about it, it's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool.
Asa Stahl, thanks a lot for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
And thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
Hey, let us know how we're doing. Send us an email at musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com.
Do you know someone with a great story to tell? Let us know. Send us an email or log in to our website, musicalinnertube.com, and click on the microphone in the lower right-hand corner to leave us a voicemail.
And while you're on our website, take a few minutes to listen to past episodes of the podcast. They're all there, along with pictures and biographies of our guests, blog posts, and lots more.
And as always, our thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for providing us with our theme music.